So we're going to record the meeting, and Jewel will index them and upload them to YouTube later. So the benefit in doing that is if you guys have questions with regards to anything that we talked about, especially where it is in the contract, she'll have it indexed. So for instance, if you want to go fast forward to the J1 section of our conversation today, you can click on it and it'll pull you right to that section of the video on YouTube. So real quick, couple of announcements. We have some new people that have joined KW. If you see them around, let them know, welcome to the team. We got a ton of people, and some of you guys are here on the call today. So thank you for making the time to jump on and to learn. Top producers, same thing. You see these guys around, give them a congratulations. They are doing well, which is amazing. Market Center, we're doing well as well. That's month over month as well as the year-to-date numbers. A couple of things that we can do better is listings taken. Obviously, listings control the market, so we want to make sure that we focus on getting listings. If you guys need help on that, let me know. We also have great classes that are coming up for that. Give some Market Center updates. Tony and I will briefly chat real quick about some updates and regulations and so forth regarding COVID. The long and short of it is, this is a crazy time that we're in right now, in both, the pandemic and how we're dealing with that. At the end of the day, we just want to make sure everyone's safe and we handle ourselves and conduct ourselves professionally and responsibly. So when you're in the office, please have a mask on. Please sign in at the front. There's a form in the front as well that you should sign and complete, and just act responsibly. Depending on more measures that may be released by the state, we may have to take additional actions. It really just depends. I hope not, but at the moment, we just want to make sure that we try to keep everyone as safe as possible. If you don't feel well, let's just apply the common sense part of it. If you don't feel well, stay home. Don't risk infecting anyone else. And this goes without saying, COVID or not, just even if you have a cold or flu, stay home, get better. If you do have symptoms of COVID, please take a test and do the proper quarantine or the negative test results before coming back into the Market Center as well. We would greatly appreciate your cooperation in that. The door, as normal, this has been the case for now since COVID started, but we have the front door locked for a reason, just so that it ensures that people don't come in and out without signing in, that we can control that flow. And we just want to make sure everyone's safe. Am I missing anything, Tony?
No.
So next topic, getting off of that somber topic, is the market. Is it slowing at all? Rates rising a little bit? It's relative, right? Tony and I were just talking about this just a few moments ago in preparation for this class. Is I think it is slowing down in some areas. It's and also in some segments. Condos and townhomes are a little bit slower, but that's relative. So it's not, sky's not falling by any stretch. The market is not crashing by any means, but instead of receiving 27 offers in 30 minutes of going live on the MLS, you might be getting 2 offers in 7 days. And that's not a detrimental thing, but you really should have your finger on the pulse of what's happening in the market, so you can advise your clients accordingly, whether you're representing both a buyer or especially a seller. A lot of sellers think that because of what they hear, what they see on the news, or what their friend told them, that you put your home on the market and you're going to get 65 offers all competing with one another, and that's not necessarily the case. Typically, when the market shifts, not crashes, so this is not the market's crashing or the sky is falling conversation, because I don't believe that to be the case at all. But when the market does shift, and it will shift, typically what I've seen is the higher priced homes are the ones that go first, as well as, or slows down first, as well as condos and townhomes. Tony, what is it in your experience? Is it relatively the same?
I think this market may be a little bit different this time. I want to say, like, on the upper end, I want to say that those homes actually have picked up even more so in the last couple of months. Normally, like when the market shifts on a low, you see it you see it happen from like the Waianae coast and it makes its way back into town, into Waikiki. That's normally has been the trend for the last 40 years. So it's kind of difficult to say how it's going to be this time around.
Yeah, it's a unique circumstance this time around as well. So, but at the same time too, keep focusing on what you guys are doing. I think you guys are doing all good things, but also make sure that you're planning ahead too. And that's why we have classes on short sales and these kind of things. It's not the sky is falling, but you also have to be a few steps ahead of other agents or competition and these kind of things in preparation for what might be around the bend.
And also, Chad, even if the market doesn't shift, you've got people that may be coming out of forbearance that that will be upside down in mortgage and have to do a short sale. So it doesn't have to be like the sign of the market at the moment, but there could be situations where people just have not made their payments on their mortgage.
Yep. Also, Bold is coming around. So I don't know if all of you, some of the people that have been with KW for a while, know what Bold is. Bold is a really great class. It helps get you into production right away. They actually track these numbers and statistics. I think it's like your production goes up by 35 to 40% while taking Bold. So it's coming back. It's coming in October. We're going to have some more information out. We're also going to have some incentives around it too, so that we can help to offset some of the costs. But I highly, highly, highly recommend anyone new and experienced to take Bold, especially if you're on a team, if you're a team leader and so forth. It's going to be an unbelievable boost to your production. Okay, so next topic is case studies and goings on. So a couple of things, we don't ever want to give details of information, specific information as to the either legal claims or files that Tony and I might be dealing with. But I thought it would be a great idea to talk about some of the instances so that you guys can avoid that same pothole that other people may have inadvertently stepped in. So one of the things we'll talk about real briefly is what happens when a seller is canceling mid-escrow. And I'm not naming anyone specific, so if that person is on this call, don't worry, I'm not going to name you. But so let's say hypothetically, it doesn't really matter what side you're on, but let's say that the seller mid-escrow, for a variety of reasons, decides to cancel when the buyer has performed. It's a tricky situation. So the first question is, Tony, can they even do that? Can the seller cancel mid-escrow when the buyer's performed?
Seller can do whatever they want, so can the buyer. Basically, at that point, if everybody's buying by the contract, all you can tell them to do is seek legal counsel at that time.
Sorry, I backed up for a second. Yeah, so you can't force someone to do anything, right? So I think to Tony's point is, if the seller wants to cancel and is not going to budge and doesn't want to move forward, how can you make them? Well, the only policing mechanism is the buyer can bring a lawsuit and bring action. The court can force the seller to perform. But if we're representing the seller, if you're representing the seller, you have to, as Kimo Stone has said many times in some of the classes he's put together for us, is we have to advise our client, in this example being the seller, we have to advise our client of the risks that the buyer has performed. They may be, we don't want to give legal advice, don't commit malpractice, but they may be committing a breach of contract, and the buyer would have the right to consult an attorney and may have legal claim for financial damages. So we have to warn them. This has come up a couple of times, and I think for a variety of different reasons, some of which might have been the seller's expectation of more offers or higher offers, or another offer may have come in while in escrow. Whatever the reason, it's really important for us to explain to clients that a legal binding contract is just that. It's legally binding, and it's important. So you want to make sure you honor it. What about in reverse, Tony, when a buyer is trying to cancel on a seller and the seller has performed?
Yeah, it's pretty much the same statement that I made when the seller wants to cancel. Is buyers can lose. This one's a little bit different. Buyers can lose their deposit. It's not an automatic situation. And so when your client, the buyer, or your client, the seller, asks you for legal advice, you just have to say, in accordance with the contract, they probably don't have the right get yourself a legal opinion, and that way you know how to follow suit.
Yeah, you know that at the I don't know why I keep doing that. I'm so sorry. Hold on. Just for so you guys know too is the buyer has a lot of opportunity to cancel, whereas the seller has not many at all. And the contract it absolutely favors the buyer because the seller knows about the property. The buyer gets the opportunity to do due diligence to ensure that the property is in working condition and it's to their liking, and the buyer can legally cancel for a variety of different reasons. I think what's important for you guys to know too is to ensure that when they cancel, if they should want to cancel, that they're canceling for the appropriate reason within the appropriate contingency. A lot of people kind of willy-nilly go, oh, we're just going to cancel for this reason when it's not the reason. So could you do that and get away with it? Maybe that's not good practice though. That's not a good idea. Make sure that even when you're writing and drafting the contract, that you explain to the buyer that this is also a legally binding contract and it should be adhered to. And yes, they do have the right to cancel for a variety of different contingencies, but it should be used the right way. Don't let your ego get in the way of protecting your client. I see this happen probably more often than not. There's a lot of agents that are on with us today that have been practicing for quite some time, and they've probably been on opposite end of an egotistical agent. I think one of the easiest pieces of advice is don't take anything personally. I mean, the whole point is we're trying to represent our client's best interest, and they're coming to us to make an objective business decision and help them navigate the contract. And sometimes agents take everything personally. They start talking about, well, I've been doing this for X amount of years, and do you know how much business I close? And I'm like, okay, none of that has anything to do with what we're talking about now, which is the purchase contract. So don't take it personally. Certainly don't let your ego get in the way. You can't control other people. If their egos are just huge, kind of let that fizzle out and just get back to the point of just protecting our client. At the end of the day, we have a fiduciary responsibility and obligation to protect their best interest. So as simple as that sounds, it happens all the time. I see it happen all the time. Emails go back and forth and back and forth. I'm sure you see it as well, Tony, but 90% of those emails are just ego-driven emails, and they're not even to the point, and they serve no purpose.
Yeah, and it's best to always, like in the email, just always reference something in the contract.
Are you obligated to do anything? This is an interesting one. So this one just came up. It's come up last couple of days, and me helping one of our agents is we are KW is on the sell side, the list side, and another firm and other agents on the buy side. And in order to qualify, so they submitted an offer. We contacted the loan officer to validate the pre-approval and did all the due diligence we were supposed to do. The seller accepted the offer, opened up escrow, and then the buyer's agent had reached out directly to, this is a tenant occupied property, had reached out directly to the tenant without even running it past us at all. Reached out directly to the tenant to try to negotiate the tenant vacate early, and had offered, some money and whatever it was to vacate. That's not appropriate. That's not appropriate for a variety of reasons. That the tenant's not party to the contract with regards to the negotiation portion. They're party to it in terms of it being an obligation that they honor the lease. What happens after closing is fine, but the reason why that's a bad idea is what happens if that buyer cancels escrow? By the way, they ultimately canceled escrow. But what happens when that buyer cancels escrow is now the tenant is left going, well, do I get a buyout, or do I get some sort of I mean, they're not even party to this negotiation, and now they're left wondering what just happened. And then when the listing agent, our listing agent, very appropriately said that's not appropriate. Please don't reach out to the tenant. Then the buyer's agent said, hey, well, can you fill out, can you write a letter saying that the tenant has found another place and that they have agreed to vacate? And our listing agent said, no, that's not the case. Yeah, I know it's not the case, but can you do that so that the buyer can qualify for the loan? And she's like, you mean commit fraud? no, I'm not gonna do that. And she said, no, well, before you answer, just think about it. Ask the seller, just make sure. Like, that was how it was presented. And our agent, thankfully, was like, no, I'm not committing. That's not even on the table for discussion. So I say that because some people go, no, it's my job. I'm obligated to do everything within my power to make sure my client either sells the home for this amount or gets this property for this amount. Yeah, it's absolutely within reason, within, you know, the boundaries of ethics and integrity and law and so forth. So that to me is kind of common sense, but I don't want to just assume or presume that people know what common sense is, because the other agent did not. I mean, even when we said that's fraud, that's not allowed, that's unethical, they're like, yeah, I get it, but just think about it. So, you know, consider that no transaction is worth your license and your reputation. Closing date falls on a weekend. Tony, you have a specific thing that you were dealing with on this one, right? Why don't you shed some light on that?
Yeah, when the closing date is set, 45 days from the date of acceptance and it happens to fall on a weekend, there's a provision in the contract that states that, recording will take place on the next business day that the Bureau of Engagement is open. That doesn't necessarily extend the contract per se. So it's always good to, have the contract all buttoned up. So if you need an extension, get the extension from the Saturday to the next closing day. Don't leave anything, open. Don't give anybody a reason to come back at a later point in time for litigation. So just always do what you're supposed to do with the contract and keeping all the timelines, deadlines, everything. Keep all the paperwork in order.
Another one is contract being executed prior to BIC review. This is the tricky thing. It becomes a slippery slope. I have some of you that I BIC for that are amazing in contract writing, super detailed. But at the end of the day, this is a legal binding contract that it has great impacts, both financial and with our clients and so forth. All it takes is for one error, one box not checked, or a word like the difference between shall and may from a legal perspective is entirely different and has different consequences and different outcomes. And the BIC, while we're not perfect, it is another set of eyes to ensure that errors and typos and these kind of things are corrected. But oftentimes what we've seen, at least recently, and I've seen this pick up, and I'm sure that Tony can probably attest to this as well, is the state of the market. Everyone is in a rush mentality. Well, rush mentality doesn't mean that you don't have fiduciary responsibility to be a professional, to take your time, to review the contracts, to go through things thoroughly. It doesn't mean that, when the market's crazy, you can skip steps and shortcut things. And so what we've seen recently is people having their client sign, and that looks like the buyer signing, and then you're sending it to the BIC to review after the buyer. Well, if we have something to correct on there, the buyer's already signed it. The whole point of it is to deliver to the client a contract that you've reviewed and put together, as well as been secondarily reviewed by the BIC, or a counter that you guys are accepting and the BIC hasn't signed it yet, or a listing. So don't forget good habits is what I'm saying, and make sure that the BICs review it first. Anything you want to add on that, Tony?
Like if you're representing the seller and you get a really good offer in at over the asking price, and you just have your clients go ahead and accept it, have the BIC review it first. There may be something look, here's the thing about the BICs is that we review contracts all the time. We collaborate with each other, because I may get contracts in from another company with an addenda in there that someone else hasn't received yet. And then we talk about what's good about this addenda, what's a red flag. And so in an agent getting a contract with a number of addenda, and now the contract goes from 14 to 25 pages, you may not nitpick it like the BICs have done over the past. So there may be something in the contract that your client has accepted that they're not bound to. And when an issue comes up with one of those provisions, the BICs can't help you out because it's too late already. And that's what's good about the second set of eyes, or even like just because we've seen contracts all day long. So a little bit, have a little bit more knowledge, and and myself. As long as I've been in the business, I'll write a contract, I'll put it away, I'll print it, I'll go look at it, and there's a couple of typos in there that I miss in the contract looking at a screen. So it's always good to have another set of eyes, just like what Chad said. Chad, you're on mute.
Sorry, thank you. Read the instructions on the PC. There's different headers on there. And I venture to guess, if I'm betting, a lot of you haven't even read the purchase contract thoroughly all the way through, but you should read it, because the amount of contracts that I get that things are left blank, and it could be, and we're going to go over some of these in detail, but like D1, which is the addenda, E2, which is inclusions, agents will put X where it's applicable, but leave other things which is not applicable completely blank. If you read the header, there's instructions that specifically says fill in all blanks, right? NA if not applicable. So make sure that that you read that and understand that, and the client that you're representing should also understand that too if you're going over these things thoroughly. But the first header, I'm just going to read this because it's important. I'm always reading the purchase contract. Chemo Stone is a stickler about that too. If you ask him a question, he won't answer the question. He's going to tell you to pull up the purchase contract and read it with them. The instructions at the very top, all in bold and all in caps, which means that it's probably important, says this purchase contract becomes a legally binding contract for the purchase of real estate upon execution by the parties. Read it carefully. Handwritten or typed provisions in the purchase contract shall supersede any printed provisions if there is a conflict. Fill in all blanks. Paragraphs preceded by checkoff boxes are optional and must be checked to be made part of this purchase contract. Write NA if not applicable. The reason why I even read that is it answers a ton of things of errors that I receive on contracts on a regular basis. One of which is I see people do this all the time where they're trying to counter out M1 being the association document section, which we'll get into. But if you notice, there is no checkoff box that makes it optional to include, which means that the authors of the purchase contract had no intention of making it optional. It should be part of the purchase contract regardless. So you don't need to make it NA or try to delete that. And just as an example. So just one example. Tony, let's talk briefly about legal claims. We have a couple of them. We're not going to get into, again, the details of it, but we thought that we would scare you straight on a couple of things. So why don't you give us some examples of what some of the legal claims that we're dealing with right now?
So we have one claim. Sellers have decided that they didn't want to sell the property anymore for a number of reasons. None of them were really valid. And so the buyer files, a claim against the seller. And then all of a sudden the seller who we represented just dragged us in because they were in breach and they're looking to shift the responsibility onto someone else. So you can do everything that you do, cross all the T's, dot all the I's, but it doesn't mean that the other party's not going to come after you, come after us. There's another situation that's been in litigation for a number of years. And it all hinges on what the agent had told the buyer when purchasing a leasehold property. So be very careful what you say. If you're not 100% certain of the answer to that question, don't answer it and just say, I'll have to get back to you after I get, someone else that's a little bit more knowledgeable. And then the latest one.
Wait, before you move on, let me just say one thing is, you guys have heard me say this before too, is, what we do as a real estate professional is 15% of that is salesmanship. 85% of that is fiduciary and being an advocate, being a consultant. In the situation that Tony had just alluded to, it's easy to kind of sell your way out of or into a situation to convince someone to, hey, you can move forward. It's fine. It'll be fine. Values will go up. It'll probably double in value in a few years by the time you sell. Or if it's a leasehold, oh yeah, they'll probably sell you the fee. I'm sure it's easy to kind of give things like that. That's a salesman approach to answering a question versus taking the time to understand, is that even accurate? Because you have fiduciary responsibility to make sure that you protect your client, our client, the firm's client as well. And if you just throw out answers willy-nilly like that, this is what ends up happening is they can come back and sue us because we're held to a different standard. They're taking our advice. They're making a financial decision that could cost hundreds of thousands of dollars based upon us answering yes or no. So please make sure that you understand what that answer is. And if you don't know, it's absolutely okay to go, I'm not sure, or there's a risk involved. When people ask me, hey, should I buy? Because I think, with home prices going crazy, do you think that the prices are going to continue going up? My answer is, I have no idea. I have no idea what the prices are going to do. Let's look at the history or statistics of what it has done. I can rely on that. You're not selling anyone anything. You're going back on history. And then you're also reminding them too, that there's a risk with everything. The prices could go down. It could go up. It could continue on this trend, but they have to be comfortable with, they're the ones that's making the payment. They're the ones that's going to live there. So our job is not just to paint a rosy picture and make people feel good. Our job is to advise risk as well. What was the other one, Tony?
The last one has to do with what you were talking about earlier, about in the heat of an argument about somebody wanting to cancel, keep your personal feelings aside and just stick to the contract. So this was a complaint that was received a couple of weeks ago. And this person has named a number of defendants in the suit. And I'm not going to say, who's involved or what's involved, but I'm just going to talk about, this wasn't even about a real estate transaction. This is about a claim for defamation of character, code of ethics, so on and so forth. So even though that the basis of a lot of stuff in the claim is probably not relevant or unfounded, it still has to be defended. So I'm just going to throw out some of the amounts that they're asking for. $1.6 million, $2.9 million, $5 million, $1 million, $8 million, $5 million, $3 million from each of the defendants that she's named in this suit. And if that's not enough, they want an additional $15 million of every defendant named in the lawsuit. So when we talk about the stuff is real, like it's real. And so just be careful what you say to somebody in an email or what you say to somebody face to face, because if they feel like you've naming them in any way, they can make a bogus claim like this, and you have to go and defend yourself now. So,
yeah, we're in a very litigious industry. It's a highly regulated industry. We're held to a different standard, and it's not a good idea. You got to conduct yourself the right way. It's not a good idea to speak ill about anyone. I mean, there's agents out there that could do better, but we don't need to defame them, speak ill about them or anything like that. But it's just all it takes. You could be in business for 40 years and all it takes is for you to lose one lawsuit like that, for your reputation to be ruined and for your career to completely end. So it's all about doing the right thing and being smart. And, we kind of pride ourselves here too at being a company of culture. So we don't need to get into all that kind of stuff to begin with. Tony, is there any other legal claims that you wanted to touch on?
No, that's pretty much it. I don't have anything on my desk as far as legal that I'm handling. If you have something already.
Yeah, thank goodness. We don't want any more. MegaCamp recap. Thank you guys for those who attended MegaCamp. I hope it was insightful. I thought it was fantastic. There's over 20,000 attendees at MegaCamp. There's tons of video content that's available. If you have subscribed and joined us at MegaCamp, those recordings are available through October 22nd. So please rewatch the ones that you think are important. You can access your video library anytime up until that point. If you didn't sign up for MegaCamp and you wanted to see more information, come talk to me and I can help point you in the right direction. Outfront is our digital and print magazine. There's a ton of things that are on there as well as Gary Keller's market update. He gives more of a national approach to what's around the bend, and some of it is really, really good statistical information, of which you can use in your consultations, both your listing presentations and buyer consultations. So take a look at that. And then without further ado, we're going to get started on our class, Strategies of a Purchase Contract, with Tony and myself. And so what is the goal today? The goal is to better understand the purchase contract, some tips and tricks, how to stay out of trouble. We'll give you some resources, some anecdotes, and so forth. Take notes, please, guys. So whether you're writing it down on your computer, an actual notepad, take notes. It's really, really important. You should be taking notes in our industry, in our profession, regardless. If you're meeting with a client for a buyer consultation, you should be taking notes. A listing presentation, you should be writing down what your client's goals and priorities are anyway. So if you're not doing that, do it. If you're brand new, get into good habits and start doing that. So before writing an offer, we're going to start from the beginning here, but before you write an offer, especially in a market like we're in right now, it is absolutely a good idea to call the listing agent and ask them a couple of questions. And this is something that I've done for years, and it doesn't really matter what kind of market you're in, but especially this market. Do you have any offers in hand? That's starting off with that simple question. And if so, how many and how strong are those offers? I would just ask that question and just be quiet. You'll often find, and if you're the listing agent, please don't say, oh yeah, I have 4 offers and one of them is 417. So if you write another offer at 418, don't say any of those kind of things, but you will find that in asking that question, how many offers do you have? How strong are they? Most agents will go, yeah, they're pretty strong, or I have one that's all cash, or they're above asking, or whatever it is. That's helpful information. Some of them will give you the specifics of it. You don't ask for specifics, but just be quiet. Let them talk. Write down anything that you need to write down. When are you presenting offers to the seller? That's super important because, again, in this crazy market where everyone is rushing the BICs, rushing the buyers, rushing yourselves to try to generate and write offers, get an idea of when they're even presenting. If they're presenting in 30 minutes and you're not even in front of a computer, then you might be completely out to begin with and wasting time and resources. So find out when they're presenting. This one to me, this is probably one of the most important questions. Besides price, what's important to the seller? And the reason why that's important is I've been in situations before where when I asked that question, the other side said, we have a few offers in hand, but no one has asked that question yet. So what's important to the seller is, and they would list like using this escrow company, closing in this amount of time, if the seller can have, not have to do a survey, and they list all these different things that was important to the seller. And I wrote all those things down and then presented it to the buyer. Are you okay with this? And are you okay with this? And are you okay with this? And so forth. And we crafted the offer to meet exactly what the seller's hopes were. And then we again, it's besides price. So it's whatever they qualify for and feel most comfortable with. But that is a very powerful question. So make sure you ask. Of course, are there any pertinent items to disclose? So, and by all means, read the MLS. I swear agents sometimes forget to read instructions and who to contact and where to send offers to, and some information. There are some agents that we have at KW that do a great job of planning listings the right way. And there's SRPDS, there's already title. In some cases, there might be a survey that's already in the supplements on the MLS listing. So take a look before you start crafting things, double check to see what's available on there. Tony, anything else you want to add on this one?
No.
A2. A2 is who we're representing. So if it's not applicable, insert NA. If it's a dual agency, you're going to put NA on A2A, A2B, and then put our firm's name in it. I know we have some guests from other firms too, so on here, but whatever firm you're with, put that in there. Don't abbreviate. For KW, don't put KW. Just actually write it out. Keller Williams Honolulu. In A2D, so if in the case of like a FSBO, for sale by owner, that seller in that case, if in fact they don't want to list with us and they prefer to represent themselves or not have representation, they would be a customer and not a client. So you would mark it as such. You would write it in such a way where A2B is checked with Keller Williams Honolulu, and A2D is selected with the X on seller. Tony, what is the difference between a customer and a client?
client you have a fiduciary relationship with, and you have to give them all the information about the other side of the other party. As a word customer, you just have to treat them fairly.
Yeah.
But
So
information they disclose to you, you have to you're obligated to disclose it to your client, your fiduciary. But not the same. Like you don't take your information about your client and relate to the customer.
yeah, and so in both situations, just know that we owe in a customer and a client relationship, we owe both of them professionalism and honesty and responding in a timely manner and these kind of things. Those are standard. But the difference between, as Tony alluded to, client and customer is with our client, we have fiduciary responsibility. We have to put their interests above our own. And so it is while it sounds subtle, it is a very distinct and substantial difference between the two.
One more thing, Chad, is and make sure when you're working with a FSBO that you do put on there's an addendum for working with a for sale by owner that protects you. It spells out the commissions that you're seeking and protects you. Sometimes agents, what they'll do is like, okay, I'm working with a FSBO, but I'm trying a listing agreement so that my commissions are protected. If you were to do that, now you have a fiduciary responsibility to the FSBO, even though you've been working with your client, the buyer, for maybe a month, 2 months, 3 months, or 4 months. So, and then you end up in a dual agency situation. So in that case, just write the offer, put in a FSBO, and just move forward and treat the FSBO as the customer, not a client.
Yeah, we have a form online, and any guests that are with different firms, see if your company has a form. It's a good idea to be honest with you, it's a good idea to get a FSBO seller to agree to whatever commission that they're going to pay you prior to even showing that property. Otherwise, the worst case scenario is the buyer and seller want to do business with each other, and you don't have an agreement. They're not an agent, so they're not held to the same standard of a co-op agreement. So make sure you have something signed prior to showing that. So that's a great piece of advice. Earnest money deposits are a great way to negotiate a contract. It's one of a few components that show the strength of an offer. However, if you put, let's say that the buyer says that they're okay with parting ways with 10,000 or 20,000. By the way, the earnest money deposit, people kind of say there's kind of a rule of thumb, and really what the rule of thumb is it dependent upon what the purchase price is and also what the type of financing it is. So if you are purchasing a property that's $2 million and it's all cash, or it's a conventional loan, you can assume that earnest money deposit is going to be much larger than if it were a VA loan, for instance. But it also coincides again with that purchase price and type of financing. But when you make your initial deposit, if the buyer is okay with parting ways with $20,000, my first inkling is, why would you want to put all 20,000 as initial deposit? You should split that up. You can put 5,000 as initial deposit and 15,000 additional deposit. You can break it up a number of different ways. And what would be the reason for that is if the parties or one party cancels, in this state, in this market specifically, both parties, both principals, both the buyer and the seller have to agree to release those funds. So what you don't want to have happen is you put in $20,000 for the initial deposit, buyer cancels rightfully within a contingency. So let's say they're within their J1 period and they cancel due to J1, but then the seller says, no, we disagree. We're not going to release earnest money funds. Now you're at a standstill, and escrow will not release anything. So if you intend on helping that client move forward on another property or just to get their money back, the money's stuck. So unnecessary for you to put all of it initial in the initial deposit section. I'd break it up. You can break it up in 50-50. You can break it up like in my suggestion, I'd probably put 25% of that deposit as the initial, and then the remaining on additional. In my experience, I would say if escrow's canceling, it's probably 60 to even 70% of the reason why it's canceling is due to J1. For some reason with regards to J1. So it is a good idea that if you do make an additional deposit, put it 2 days after J1 satisfaction. And the next slide will kind of break that down a little bit further. C1 Make sure that there's a AM/PM S2 in the purchase contract. I'm sure that many of you don't even know what S2 is. It's on the very back of, or some of the last pages on the purchase contract. It addresses the time zone. It states on there that everything is Hawaii Standard Time. However, I would not assume that, because some buyers and sellers are off island, and they just kind of assume that it's where they are. So I get in the habit, and it's not a requirement, but it's just one of those things that's good sense. On C1, when you put the time in, just put HST for Hawaii Standard Time, so that it's real clear to the agent as well as to the other side that this is with regards to Hawaii Standard Time. C2, when using an additional deposit, I mentioned this before, if you're going to put that in there, put 2 business days after J1 satisfaction. Don't use things like 2 biz days, BIZ days, or 2 days after J1. The reason why I don't like that, I've seen that before. 2 days after J1, what? After you've conducted J1, after you sign J1, after J1's expired? That's too open-ended. So be specific. 2 business days after J1 satisfaction is sufficient. D1, if there's anything that's not applicable, don't leave it blank. We talked about it earlier. PC requires you to enter NA. And be clear about, the addenda. Everything that's listed on there, you guys should know not only where it's located, but what it is. And by the way, I forgot to mention, really great news. If Alan Hanaike, he's on the compliance chair on our ALC. He worked very hard in getting a ton of these documents in our zip forms. So no longer do you have to upload them via PDF. A ton of them are already readily available in zip forms. And we've also created in the global templates, VA template as well as a conventional template. So you can select a template. It'll grab every single addenda that is appropriate for that type of offer, as well as some of the language in minimum days. So you still have to fill things in. I mean, you have to be a professional. There's no template and shortcut to do business. You have to represent your client's best interest in their needs and goals. But it does put in a lot of the language in there for you, so that it makes it a little bit easier for you. So try that out. If you have questions, just let me know. Having a strong buyer consultation to educate your client on the market of the moment is really, really important. So you should be going over things like, especially when you're dealing with a new buyer or a first-time home buyer, talk to them about what days on market looks like, and talk to them about what sales price to list price ratio is. If they're looking to purchase in a specific area, for instance, Ocean Point, pull numbers on what the days on market and the sales price to list price ratio is in Ocean Point. If the sales price to list price ratio in that area is 105%, what does that tell you? That tells you that, making an offer less than or at asking price is probably not going to get them a winning offer. And just, again, you don't want to sell someone an idea, but it's important for them to understand if they're really motivated and want to move forward. So asking a question like, if we submit this offer at or even less than asking price and you don't get it, how would that make you feel? Because you just want to understand, right, where they're headed, and if they're going to move forward. There's some people that they are okay with writing offers less than asking. That's fine, but you want to know where they're at. You want to understand what their goals are as well. And you would do them a disservice if you didn't explain that to them and they're making offers less than asking in an area that's closing above asking. And that's also you being a market expert too. You should definitely know these kind of things. E2 for inclusions. If something is not applicable, don't leave it blank. PC requires you to enter NA in the space provided. So make sure there's no blank spaces. Some of the things that I would also include, if applicable, is, in E2 where it says other, if it's a single family home, put in there, you can put in their garage remotes. You can put if attached as attached. Whatever is applicable in that property, you can put it in there. E3, even if this is kind of how we interpret this, but E3 is, even if it's an own PV system, I would absolutely still use E3 to ensure that you get all copies of documents, contracts, et cetera, that may be applicable with the PV system or plan. So sometimes I've seen other firms handle that E3 as though it's only for leased, and it says lease there, but it says other. So I would absolutely include that if it's an own system, because sometimes there's a warranty, sometimes there's a maintenance plan, sometimes there's other documents that might be very pertinent when that PV system and the property conveys. F2, this is one thing that a lot of you guys have been using and updated in your contracts, which is great. Some of you are still missing. Tony had this conversation, and I think we added this as a standard almost a year ago in a conversation with an attorney, right? So if for instance, 30 days from acceptance is kind of standard language, or 45 days from acceptance, add at the end of that and delivered vacant or to be delivered vacant. It just reinforces, yes, the contract already states that in certain portions, which we'll get to, but it reinforces the buyer's intention, especially now, while during COVID, while we had the whole eviction moratorium and all these other kind of things. F3, before completing, check with the buyer's lender. I mean, I can't tell you how often I'm speaking with an agent, whether you're representing both buyer and seller and you haven't spoken to the lender. You should have that communication and understanding of what's going on in terms of their timeline as well. So if you're representing the buyer, you're writing the contract, before you fill this in, ask if they're even able to close. I had a conversation with one of our agents who represented a buyer, and that lender, so they contacted the buyer's lender. It was a regular conventional loan. The buyer's lender said we can close in 30 days, no problem. So they wrote it as 30 days. And in the F3A, they put 10 days. So it was 30 days and then a possible 10-day extension. Come down to the day before the buyer is supposed to sign, so just a few days before they're actually supposed to close, the lender didn't, unbeknownst to anyone, the lender didn't inform the agent, didn't inform the buyer. The buyer's agent called and said, hey, just want to make sure we're still on track. And then they said, oh no, we have like 10 more days. And we said, no, you don't. You have the scheduled closing date is, 30 days from acceptance. And the lender, I have the text because the agent sent it to me. The lender interpreted things like, oh no, it's 40 days. I have 40 days. Well, here's the problem with that. Other people outside of our industry, meaning, loan officers or what have you, they might have their own interpretation. They may see that we have the right to, or we could extend it. But here's the issue that they're not planning for. What if the seller extends it by 1 day? Now they just burn the entire F3A. So the 10 days is now gone in that instance. So it's really, really important to get a clear understanding of how much time is needed to close by the buyer's lender, what kind of extensions you have. Don't playing games is not a good idea. Like if someone says, hey, I'm going to use a USDA loan and I think I need 60 days, but 60 days for closings is kind of a weak offer. Why don't I write it with 45 days plus 15-day extension? You're playing games. Like I understand why you'd need to do that, but that's a dangerous game to play because you jeopardize not closing at all. If the other side uses that extension, it's gone. So just understand that. It is a double-edged sword, as I mentioned before. If the seller uses it, it goes away. Please check, as Tony alluded to before, other firms' addenda too, because that can alter or deteriorate some of the rights and contingencies provided in the purchase contract. There are some firms that have language that basically says if one party uses a certain amount of days, the other party gets to use the remaining amount of days. That's an alteration of the contract, which is fine so long as all parties know that. Think of the contract as a chessboard. So you just have to understand how they maneuvered so that you know what's remaining and what your rights are and what the client's rights are. F4, consider using First White Title. They're a great company. They've done a lot of enhancements as well. It's a little out of order, I apologize. E4, if furnished included inventory list, it's also a good idea to include photos. Be real specific if in fact you're doing a closing with inventory with furniture. F8, assessments. If you're on the buy side and you're writing a contract for the buyer, you're going to want to select seller, and then on F8A as well as B, write none in each of those blanks. But you guys have heard me say this before, like attorneys, real estate agents can sometimes contradict themselves depending on who we're representing, the buyer or the seller. If you're on the list side and there's an assessment, you're going to want to be real clear and make sure that You understand what that assessment is. Is it a loan? Is it payments? Is it ongoing? Is it for a specific amount of time and then it comes to an end? Make sure that the seller has it on the SRPDS, and make sure that any assessments that's on here that you want, the seller wants you to include, or the seller wants you to avoid or not pay for, that it's noted. So you're not disclosing, but you're rather over disclosing to ensure that you represent that the right way. And also, as a note in here, if there's an assessment, you can also address that in section Q to be above board and ultra clear about that. F12, if the buyer wishes to have more than one set of keys, you can note that in E2, which is in the inclusion section. The modification of the purchase contract, when was that? Was that May of 2019 now? I think it is. So they made some changes on that, and 2 sets of keys are no longer boilerplate language. So if you need more keys or whatever it is that you need, make sure that you note that as such. Don't assume. H1 on the buyer side, make sure that you enter the type of proof of funds. My recommendation on this is, so H1, if you notice, it has bank statement, has verification from depository, financial institution. Unless it's an all cash deal, I don't recommend using either. And here's the reason why is, let's say that you're writing an offer and the buyer has a ton of cash, but you're putting 20 or 30% down, and the listing agent knows that it's priced a little high. If you have bank statement and the sell side now can see all of the buyer's personal funds and assets, that doesn't help negotiation, right? So if you only need $30,000 to close based on down payment or closing costs or whatever it is, but you can see a bank statement that shows $200,000 available, it's hard to, you might put them in a position where it might be a little bit harder to negotiate. For the most part, same thing with verification of depository financial institution. Or the flip side of that is, if you're writing an offer and the buyer barely has enough money to close, you need $20,000 to close and he has $20,500. Same exact thing where you might be putting yourself in a precarious situation to negotiate. So I always recommend, if you do have financing, if you're using that provision, to use proof of funds from buyer's lender. Another thing too is, you can check H1A that there's no contingency on obtaining cash funds. One thing that you can also do too is not check and do NA for H1A, so that there either is no ability, you don't need to provide the proof of funds, or you can put like 1 day, make that short, and then you on the next set of days you can put 0 or NA that section, so that it reduces or eliminates the time frame that the seller can examine. In this iteration, the newest iteration of the purchase contract, it's based on satisfaction of the seller. So you can actually provide, if you only need $30,000 of assets or reserves, you can provide $1 million, and the seller can say, nah, I don't like it, not satisfied with it. So you want to try, it's important for you to understand what that means and why, so that you can structure that and not leave an opening for the seller to cancel. I have seen sellers, when we represent the buyer, that the seller has canceled based on that. So really nothing except for them not being satisfied because another offer came in that was stronger than our buyers. So just be aware of that. Let's see. Tip on the reverse of that, on your represent the seller. On the sell side, you do want bank statements, right? So I just gave you contrary information again. So you're on the list side, and you definitely want that information so that you can understand how much money they have, and where to negotiate and so forth. So again, contrary information, but it's important to understand the position of both. And Tony brought this up the last time, which I think is great. Sometimes the purchase contract, while it gives specific instructions, I think that it can be wrong. We've checked with chemo in certain portions of this. This one is one of them, where in the beginning it says choose paragraph H1 or paragraph H2. Well, there's one specific circumstance that I can think of, or at least a couple of them, that you can do both. So Tony, what do you think? What would be a good indication or a good reason why someone might use both?
Well, if your buyer has sufficient funds for the initial and the additional deposits, but they may not have the balance of the down payment unless they're getting a gift or they're getting cash funds out of another sale of another property. Like, you want to use both of them.
Sorry,
was that the right answer? I don't hear a yes.
hold on. I'm trying to, I think someone moved the slide. Hold on one second. Sorry about that. Yeah. So, what would be the reason that is one of them? Contingent upon closing, or you have, let's say that you have, they're putting out $50,000 and 20,000 they have cash, so that's part of the verification of funds. But the remaining of it could be coming from a HELOC or gift funds or whatever. So it can be a combination of different things. So you can use both, but you want to just get a clear understanding of where the funds are coming from the buyer, and some of that reason is if it's contingent, if they don't have the money liquid and it's tied up with something, you really have to ask additional questions, because that time frame of your closings, it might change entirely. So if you put on there that you're closing in 30 days, but it's contingent upon them cashing out their 401k and it takes 45 days to cash, then you're already off on your timing. So get a really good understanding of where those funds are coming from. So again, you don't write the contract in a way that would default your buyer and jeopardize their earnest money deposit. I-1B. So on the buy side, you'll want to date this as reasonably short as possible. This is one of those, I don't know why, this is one of those like sticklers for me that I have an issue with. And here's my thought process, just so I can explain it to everyone so you guys can understand, is I oftentimes will see contracts come to me with I-1 that says, as an example, 10 days. So that what that means is when you open up escrow within 10 days of acceptance, you're going to get a copy of the SRPDS. Well, I also see, especially in this very competitive market, that agents have 7 to 10 days for your J1, your home inspection. We are not doing your client a service by possibly receiving the seller disclosure after you conduct the home inspection. Because what if on that home inspection report it says that there's been a continual leak in the upstairs bedroom for the last 3 years, and they've had it fixed, so it doesn't seem like there's a leak now, but but that's been the case. Wouldn't you want to know that, so that when you have that home inspection done, you can make some notes on that SRPDS, you can hand it over to the home inspector and say, can you please focus on this area? Or we've had the AC serviced continually every 3 months because it keeps overflowing or backing up. Like, those are the things that you want the home inspector to know about. So I would highly recommend on A1B to make that as short as possible when you're on the buy side. Make it 1 or 2 days, so that the idea is you can get that as quickly as possible. You can review it. You can ask questions. If based upon the information that the seller's indicating on there that they've had this repaired or this replaced, you can ask additional questions like, was that done by a licensed individual? Is there a warranty included in that? Can you provide me with that receipt, or whatever it is that you're asking? And all that information can then be provided to the buyer and to the home inspector.
Hey, Chad, before you go too far into SRPDS, Rosa had a question in the chat.
Let's see. Would it make sense for the buyer to open a separate account for this reason? Are we talking about? No, that's a great question. You're talking about the proof of funds?
Yes.
That's a great question, Rosa. I would say no. So I'm going to put my mortgage banker hat on for a moment. Funds have to be what's called seasoned, and seasoned means that it has to have
that's
typically a 30-day average, which in order to get a 30-day average from a bank statement, you have to have funds sitting in there between 60 and 90 days.
Yeah.
So you could, in theory, do that, but then that's like planning way out. That's like, I'm opening an account to make a purchase in 6 months from now kind of thing, and I'm not touching the funds for that duration. So great question, but no, I don't recommend doing that.
Can I ask another question about that? Because you mentioned that if they see the total amount of money that somebody has in their account, I mean, I personally speaking, I think that would be really silly for the seller to be like, well, they have all this money. Well, we all know we need money to live. So, I mean, has that happened before in your experience?
Yeah, I've represented. See, it's funny because even though it's my own client, I can see you kind of see how people think. And when you're dealing with a real estate transaction, so, sitting in front of a seller, for instance, and knowing, like, some of the sellers that I know, I've helped them buy that home, or that might be on their third or fourth or fifth transaction working with me. So I've worked with them for many years. We have trust. I know them personally and the whole thing, and they're great people. It's almost like there's a component of your brain that switches off. And I've been in a situation where I'm presenting to them offers and we're looking over different things. And the moment that they see someone has X amount of dollars in the bank, they're not even thinking straight anymore. It's like they're going, oh, maybe we can. I've literally had this question. Maybe we can counter back and ask for more money. I'm like, but they offered you more than asking. Like, what are you talking about? It's the highest price offer that we like. It's a weird human thing that happens. So I would not put it past anyone. It just makes things unclear unnecessarily. So there are reasons why you would have bank statements for sure. Like I said, on the list side, I would always ask for that. But on the buy side, I would never show my hand. It's unnecessary. You would hope that somebody would be realistic and just kind of look at the facts as needed, but I wouldn't put it past someone to have ulterior motives, even inadvertently.
Okay, thanks. I haven't come across that, but it is actually something to consider. Interesting.
Also, on the list side, I would, if I were you, I highly recommend it, because we're just not a listing document or a listing class necessarily, but I would absolutely have a lot of things prepared when you're doing your listing. Like before you sign a listing, you should have already ordered the prelim. You should, upon executing the listing agreement, you should already have them start working on the SRPDS. These kind of things are super important. And so when you're on the list side, you should already have that ready to go, the SRPDS. In fact, I would have it on the MLS supplements. And the reason is because you want to get ahead of any kind of potential issues. I mean, if someone fills that thing out and tells you about a foundation issue that you didn't even know about, and you only discovered it because he handed it to you 3 days after you've already opened up escrow, that's a hard conversation to have with the other side. Like, hey, by the way, there's a major foundation issue, or whatever it is. So it is actually our requirement in having a license to ensure that we know everything about the property that we can in research, in investigation, which is reviewing all the documents that are readily available to us and so forth, and planning out accordingly is really appropriate. Which is in this case getting the SRPDS completed prior to the listing and reviewing it thoroughly so you understand what the condition of the property is as well. I-2 on the buyer side, you'll want to have as minimal days as possible. I-2 on the list side. So this is the amended disclosure, by the way, not the initial disclosure. On the list side, you'll want it as long as possible so that you can have any potential remedy by the time that you find out about an issue. So I'm going to give you an example. Same thing with the I-1. I see like 7 to 10 days on that. I think that's far too long. I-2, I see the same thing, 7 or 10 days. What that's referring to is while in escrow, after the initial disclosure has already taken place. So let's say that you're in escrow and they find out something's wrong with the property, or there's a leak, or there's some sort of damage someplace or whatever. What that's saying, if you have it as 10 days, is they have 10 days to amend the disclosure. Well, what if you're closing in like 3 days? That's you're giving the other side way too much time, and you're not properly protecting the buyer. Now, again, contrary advice. If you're on the list side, you're going to want to make it as long as possible. And the reason why you want to make it as long as possible is because you want to try to find a remedy. So some people freak out, right? So if you say, hey, the AC stopped working, and you're on the list side, you tell the buy side, the AC stopped working. If it's a first-time home buyer, they might go, if the AC is not working in Hawaii, I'm canceling. But if you had a longer amount of time on I-2, and you found out the AC is not working, you could have already had it fixed or remedied or find the potential solution. And then when you deliver that information, hey, we're going to amend the SRPDS, by the way, it's already been fixed. You could have literally solved that problem at the same time that you disclosed. Tony, were you going to say something?
Yeah, it goes back to the point when you just talked about the SRPDS. SRPDS, if you have like 10 days on list side and all of a sudden now you redisclose something, and you've got 10 days to do it, and your closing date falls in within that time frame, it doesn't extend the closing date. And so if you get yourself, and anything can happen in real estate. So here's a scenario: is that you've already extended once, somebody's burnt off 1 day of F3, you don't have the opportunity to get another extension unless it's agreed upon by the buyer and the seller. Seller gives you an unupdated SRPDS, which falls, the deadline falls outside of closing day, and the seller is not going to give you an extension because they've got a full price cash offer or even higher than what you got, and they're going to like either push you out or force you to buy something where you don't have enough time to do your due diligence. And so it's really important, as Chad said, when, you know, in I-1, get the disclosure statement if you're representing the buyer as soon as possible. Don't put 10 days in there, because what happens if you get the disclosure statement after the J1 inspection, you're not going to be able to use I-4 in the contract either. Like you've burnt that time out as well. So it's really important to really know the contract and why you have dates and timeframes in for a buyer versus, you know, representing a seller.
And also too, you know, Tony and I were chatting right before this class too, and we were kind of proud of the fact that over the last couple of years since we started doing these types of classes, our contracts, your contracts that you guys are writing have gotten so much better, like literally substantially better in how you're crafting the contracts. But I will note that it's not just crafting the you can be as slick as possible on how you craft the contract. You also have to live within the guidelines of the contract as well. You have to operate within the contract. You have to make sure that you're not running through timelines and you're documenting things and you're advising risk to your clients. And there's other, the contract is one piece of it. I mean, that's like 10% of it. There's still a whole thing that you have to do to protect your client. So you guys have gotten really, really good at writing contract, which is fantastic. Make sure you understand it and like why you're putting in certain things, and also make sure that you act appropriately within a timeline as well. I3A, it pertains to the receipt of the SRPDS. So I3 is buyer's rights and obligations upon receipt. I3B pertains to the time to examine. So the receipt of the SRPDS is just acknowledging, yes, I got it. It's not signing off on it, it's not approving it. It's just acknowledging receipt of it. Whereas I3B pertains to the time to examine. This is important, because it allows the buyer the opportunity to, and I see this happen too, is I3B and sometimes I3C is like 3 days. Well, to me, this is the example, is if you have if the buyer has 3 days to examine it, what if it's a roof leak? How quickly do you think, if you found out today, could you get a roofer out to the property to give you a quote to examine the whatever the repairs that might be needed are, to provide an estimate or a quote so that the buyer can make an informed decision on whether they want to move forward or not? I guarantee you it's not 3 days. That's not long enough. So consider that. I3B, I3C is the time that the buyer has to examine either the SRPDS or the amended SRPDS. You got to give them enough time. 10 days, in my opinion, is minimum of what that should be. On the buy side, right, I3C with 15 days for the benefit of the buyer. The longer the better, obviously. I3 is seller driven, while I4 is buyer driven. So buyer side, if you use 15 days, you'll have an additional 15 days to terminate the purchase contract upon discovery or an amended disclosure. On the listing side, you'll want a minimum amount of days in I4B. So I'm kind of flip-flopping now. If you're representing the seller, you're going to want that as short as possible. And to avoid such an extended time frame, the buyer can cancel, attend the home inspection. So I'm going to give you an example. When this purchase contract first came out in May 2019, one of my clients, who happened to be not only an attorney but a judge, we went through this. So it was brand new. That contract had just come out, and I attended. I'm on the list side. I attended the home inspection, and we, she's super thorough and disclosed everything and anything that she knew about the property. But in my career, any home that has already been lived in, it's impossible. It's impossible for the SRPDS to match up with a potential home inspection report. Like it's not possible, because the seller's not crawling on the roof or in between, rafters, and they're not doing those kind of things that a home inspector would. So of course, a home inspector is going to find more things. So I attended the home inspection. I was friendly with the home inspector, just asked him, hey, so anything major? He kind of gave me the rundown. I heard the summary that they gave to the buyer. I took notes, and I immediately gave the notes to the seller, who immediately redisclosed it, therefore shortening the time. Because what that does is if the seller redisclosed it, if you look at the I3 and IB, or should I say I4A and I4B, it's the shorter of the two. So we shorten up that time frame by us disclosing first, and so it burns the buyer's ability to have a longer period of time. So I'm not saying that you have to. I think it's a good practice, though, if you represent a seller, that you should be. This is just looking out for their best interest, so you should absolutely be there to make sure that there's nothing major that the seller didn't already disclose or didn't know of. And especially if it's something like a leak or something that it's a major issue. If there is something that's detrimental to the property, leak is one of those things that can cause a major problem with mold, and it can be one condition today, but unremedied for 3 weeks, it can be disastrous. So what if there was a leak and the buyer ended up canceling, and you didn't even know that there was a leak because you didn't intend the home inspection? Now you got to go back in the market. Now you're finding a new buyer. Now you're 2 or 3 months later, and that leak is not that same leak as it was before. Now it's a different animal altogether. So it's a good idea to attend those things. General disclosures: lead-based paint is required as an added disclosure to all properties that are built in 1978 or earlier. Failure to do so is a $10,000 fine from the EPA per incident. So per incident, that per the EPA is anything missing initials, missing signatures is considered an incident. So if you have 3 missing initials, that's $30,000. That's how they calculate that. That's a big fine. So make sure that you do that. What I always recommend, and most of the agents that I pick for do this, which is great, is have the client sign the EPA handout. So if it's a property that's built 1978 or earlier, included in your purchase contract, include that PDF. And I think it's called Protecting Your Home or something like that. You can Google it. It's from the EPA. And if you find it, save it as a PDF and keep it in your on your desktop, and send that out to any properties that are 1978 or earlier that you're writing an offer on, and just have them sign and date like page 1, just so that it coincides with that purchase contract that you wrote. J1. Same thing here, by the way. I know that some of you guys, I'm so thankful, Tony. I talk to agents in other states, and in other states, in my opinion, it's so reckless. They waive almost every contingency. Like I'm sure you heard the same thing too. They're waiving J1. They're waiving all kinds of stuff. And I'm like, I get that you want to be aggressive, and we do have the duty of instruction, but to me, it shows that we are clearly advising the risks to our client to say that that's not a smart thing to do, because we don't see that a lot here. And as you notice, as I read in the beginning, there's no box in front of J1 because the authors of the contract didn't intend for that to be NA'd. That's really how to look at that, right? But more importantly, when you use J1, what amount of days should you put in there? You have to have some sense in this. If you're an agent that does a lot of transactions, you probably have a lot of vendors and you probably have some relationships. So you might have a home inspector or home inspectors that can meet your deadlines, which is fine. That's great. But make sure that the older the home is, you got to give yourself enough time. So if the home is a large home, an older home, has a pool, putting 7 days that's not going to cut it. There's no way. Especially if the home is like built in the 30s or 40s, you might have to do sewer scoping. You might have to check the roof. There's other things that you're going to have to do. So make sure that you put the appropriate amount of time that's on there. I'm kind of a stickler about this too, is J3, which is the final walkthrough, which is, by the way, a minimum of 5 days. You guys have been great at that. There's a reason for that. Some of the minimum or the guidelines or standards that we have in place is because we've had issues as a result that led up to us making those standards. So some of it is, if you're on the buy side and your J3, your final walkthrough, if you think about it this way, is, let's say I've seen this happen. People put 1 day. I literally have seen 1 day before. This drives me crazy. 1 day or 2 days or 3 days. That's not enough time for you to take action. So people kind of think of it as the best case scenario versus the worst case. Best case scenario, an agent and maybe a less experienced agent will go, yeah, I'm going to close on Tuesday. So yeah, we'll do the final walkthrough on Monday. That's the best case, because they're just thinking, we're just going to look at it and the buyers are going to go, oh my gosh, this is amazing. They fall in love with it all over again and they're super excited. That's the best case. Well, what happens if you walk in on Monday and the home is flooded because there's a leak over the weekend? You don't even have enough time to contact the escrow company to do a withholding, of which they have to get permission to do the withholding from the seller to begin with. Like, you're going to have a conflict, and that buyer will likely end up closing on a property that they are not happy about because you didn't give enough time to plan accordingly. Tony, do you want to say something?
Can I chime in for a second? So
Yeah.
in that scenario, because closing is on Tuesday, you're doing your walkthrough on Monday, and the loan has already been funded probably on Thursday or Friday of the week previously, and your conveyance documents are already down at the Bureau of Conveyances and can't be pulled. So it's not a question that your buyer may be, your buyer will absolutely be closing on that property with the scenario and the issues that you just disclosed or stated.
I've only seen in my career a loan, this is literally a term, by the way, a loan unfunded twice in 21 years. It's not easy. It's almost impossible. So yeah, Tony's right. Once it's funded, the bank does not want that money back. So you're moving forward, like it's happening. So we put, and those who are not with KW that are guests with us, it's a smart idea to put 5 days, because then you have enough time to maneuver. So you do it in 5 days or even more. It allows you the opportunity to, and by the way, do you guys know what J3 is for? It's to ensure that there's no newly damaged or new issues that have arisen since the last time that you've inspected the property, which was J1. So it's not to rehash something that was already there or on the disclosure, or, I don't like the color of the exterior. That's not what it's for at all. It's to ensure that there's no new damage or new issues that have come up, or to double check that if you've agreed on certain repairs. So if you said, hey, I want you to fix, Mr. Seller, fix this and fix that, it's also to verify that those items have been repaired or remedied. And if not, then J4 kicks in. By the way, let me ask, anyone can come off of mute, is let's say that you do a J3 and the property's in terrible condition. Maybe there's a leak, and it's a bad leak. Can the buyer cancel? Anyone?
No.
Look at that. I mean, I've had a feeling Audrey was going to say something.
150% is withheld, but they cannot cancel.
Yeah, that's right. Tony, what were you going to say? Same thing?
Like, if you go do your inspection, there's a leak.
Yeah, let's, can they, I mean, this is kind of a trick question, right? But so Tony's probably going to unpack
So
this
I'll
a
give you
little
my
further.
take, is that one, that becomes a disclosure issue. And therefore you go back to the contract 5-4 and see how many days the buyer has to go ahead and re-inspect. And absolutely the buyer has the right to cancel.
Yeah. But so it is a little bit of a trick question. So you can cancel on J3, but it's not, it goes back to an I2 issue. So that's the amended disclosure. So again, that's why, you can't rehash things that were already in existence. It's for new things, new repairs, new issues, and what have you. Can you cancel, let's say that everything is in perfect working order, but they didn't clean the property. Can you cancel?
No.
Are you saying no because Tony Pace is violently shaking his head no?
I can't see him. I don't have my screen up, but just because somebody doesn't clean the house doesn't mean you can cancel.
Yeah, that's correct. That's absolutely right. So, here's one thought process and one recommendation that I would give you is, whether you're on the buy side or the list side, what I recommend, and this is obviously, we have to make sure that we are putting our clients' goals and priorities first. So if you have a client that's like a stickler and says, I want a clean house, and obviously you're gonna have cleaning in there, that's not a big deal. But if they're negotiable to this, to one way to remove any kind of emotion, because for whatever reason, cleaning, in my experience, causes like some sort of emotion in the transaction, where because there's different standards of what clean is. And so what I recommend, whether you're on the buy side or list side, is negotiate a credit in lieu of cleaning, because then that removes it altogether, and the buyer at closing can have their own cleaner come in and do it. So buyer requests $500 credit in lieu of cleaning. Now they don't have to worry about, oh, the fan blades have dust on it, or whatever the thing is, because sometimes, especially in a market like this, if the property is vacant, the seller may have already cleaned it prior to listing it, so therefore it sat uncleaned and vacant for 2 months. And if after 2 months they said, I don't want to have it cleaned, it just removes any kind of expectation or potential issues. But when you're talking about J3, J8, and J9, that's the removal of items, the cleaning, and then the walkthrough. What I oftentimes see is from other firms, you guys are really good about this, but at other firms I see they put same days. So if it's like 3 days, they'll put 3 days, 3 days, 3 days. Don't do that. Like, put it in chronological order. So, because if you think about it, it's going to be a transaction coordinator more than likely that's going to put these days into a timeline to set these things in motion. So assuming that that's the case, just make it easy. Put J8 7 days. So meaning that they're taking items out of the property, then they're going to be cleaning it, then it'll be ready for you to do final walkthrough. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen where they're like, oh, I know you want to do the final walkthrough, but the carpets are still wet. Well, that's probably because you put the same day on every single cleaning and final walkthrough. So you're going to cause yourself a little bit of a headache. J4, avoid having any work completed after closing. After closing, it's kind of, I don't want to say game over, but we have almost no control. So you want to do it, prior to, if at all possible. Tip, J3 should be a minimum of 5 days. We talked about that. J8, this is the cleaning portion. There's that little box on there. I'm sorry. And J9, sorry, that's a misprint. So J9, make sure that you, on the buy side, you can click entire property to be clean, but know what that means. If you have intentions on the buy side of like the buyer wants the gutters cleaned out or whatever, don't just click that and assume that the seller is going to do that, because I almost guarantee you they're not going to do that. Just put it in section Q. Check that box, but also add it in section Q that seller shall have, hedges clipped and gutters cleaned, or whatever it is that the buyer expects. If you're on the list side, I absolutely recommend that you eliminate or strike that sentence out entirely, the entire property. It hasn't been tested as far as I know. Tony, have you heard any lawsuits or anything like that that box has been tested yet?
No, it ends up where somebody's paying for additional cleaning. It's usually like the listing or the buyer's agent.
Yeah, so it hasn't been tested to my knowledge. Don't be the first to have it tested, basically, because it's a little bit misleading. And what it says, by the way, is on J9 in that box, it says the seller shall have the entire property professionally cleaned with receipts provided. Entire property, it doesn't say interior. Entire property means entire property. So that's the crux of it. So I would be, if I'm on the list side, I would strike that sentence entirely. K1 should not be used. This is commonly used on other islands in specific circumstances. On Oahu specifically, when you're talking about single family home and not a condo and townhome, of course, use K2. K2 is not necessary, as I mentioned, on a condo or townhome. Some CPRs, it is applicable definitely for single family homes. We have language, by the way, in this. So what Tony and I did was we crafted a bunch of clauses. So in a market like this, a lot of sellers are saying, hey, I've already had a survey done 3 years ago. Here's what, let me see if I'm speaking ahead of time here. No, I didn't even put it in there. So let's say that you write an offer and you put in their K2 and they counter back, and what they counter back with says buyer to accept existing survey. Is that strong enough to protect your buyer? I would say absolutely not, because what's on the survey? Like they're to accept the survey, but what's on it? What happened since that survey? There's a lot of other things in play. So we've written language for you. It's in zip forms. It's in the global templates. If you don't know specifically where that is, you can ask me, you can ask Carrie, ask one of us, and we'll direct you to it. But basically what you want to know is what it should happen is the seller shall provide copy of survey dated whenever that is, within X amount of days of acceptance, right? Usually within, if they already have it, they should give it to you within a day or two of acceptance, where the buyer should have 7 days, 10 days to examine it or terminate based on O2. And then what you should also ask is for the seller to provide on the SRPDS that they haven't had any, they haven't built any fences or modified anything or added any walls or modified the boundaries to any, because what you're doing now is you're holding them accountable to, here's a survey that they've already had 2 or 3 or 4 years ago, and here's the SRPDS that basically is an affidavit that basically says that they haven't done anything new, so it matches up. And if there is something that they've not disclosed or failed to disclose, then that becomes a potential civil issue between the buyer and seller, but at least you protected the buyer. That's the main thing. So don't be so quick to just accept the seller's previous survey. That's not good enough. Tip, write in who the buyer selects for TR in section Q. So L2, which is a termite inspection area, you can fill that in as you normally would. But one of the things that I do is, if you notice that first line, within X amount of days after acceptance, buyer shall select a pest control operator to conduct inspection and blah, 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 blah. People always, they'll put like 5 days in there and they don't even follow that timeline for whatever reason. If you already know who you're going to use or who the buyer is going to use for the termite inspection, just put it in section Q. And you can put in there just to satisfy L2, buyer selects ABC pest company. And that immediately satisfies that requirement. So you're just making your job a little bit easier. M1, as I alluded to before, do not delete this section. There's no box in front of it that allows you to check it or make it NA. So just leave it as is. This next part threw people off before, so I'll just explain it. I said you might consider adding a covenants inspection at M1 if it's a condo, townhome, or an association. Why? So in certain areas that have an association, but it might be a single family home or in some cases a condo. So like Ocean Point is an association, an area is single family homes with an association. You have to have association approval to do things like add a tool shed or to do some sort of modification in the yard. If there's some sort of modification that you're when you do the open house, when you see the open house, or when you do a showing and you see something that seems out of ordinary or not like the other properties, like a shed, for instance, that sticks up higher than the fence line. If you want, you can ask for in section Q a covenants inspection. And what that is it is an inspection that the seller would pay for, that someone from the association, property management company or whatever, would go to the property to ensure that that property is not in violation of the house rules or the bylaws. So that when I've actually had an issue like this about a couple of years ago, where the buyer purchased it, didn't know that there was there was a violation, and they basically assumed that issue. So what the covenants inspection does is it allows the HOA or the association to ensure that there's no violations on the property. Most agents don't know what that is. That's not a common thing. Again, I'm not saying to use that in any of your offers or all of your offers, but rather the ones that you have concern that something might be out of the ordinary. Another one that's come up, which seems pretty benign, but was an issue, was in town, some of the high-rise condos, not all of them allow, especially the ones that are older, they don't allow window ACs, or they did, but some of them are grandfathered in, but it's only a few of them, or whatever the case is. So I was doing a showing and I looked and I saw that there's only like 4 window ACs, this one being one of them. And I asked for a covenants inspection, and sure enough, they were not approved to have a window AC. And that was a sticking point to the buyer. The buyer was like, if I'm going to buy a condo here in Hawaii, I need to have some sort of AC unit. So that was a deal breaker once we found out that they weren't able to have it. But can you imagine closing on a condo with the client that expects to have AC and they can't as a result of that? So just know when and when not to use it, but that's a helpful tool to keep in mind. M2, delivery of documents. It's advisable to write the offer with 2 things: electronically formatted documents via email and internet address where the documents are located. Not the other 2. The other 2 are hard copies. What's the other one? Printed, right? Oh, I'm sorry, CD or DVD. So you don't want hard copies. You don't want CD or DVD. The reason is if you cancel, you got to return those things. So why give yourself extra work? If you represent a seller who is trying to decide whether to sell or to rent, so this is a great one. If you deal with military and your buyer who now turns into a seller and they're getting ready to sell, I get this a lot. You want to present choices and options. We don't want to determine the path that someone takes, but it is our job to warn and show the risks and so forth. I get a lot of military that say, "Oh, I'm thinking about renting. I'm trying to decide whether I should sell or rent." One thing that you should absolutely do, especially if they're considering rent, is get a net sheet. If new agents, if you don't know what a net sheet is, it's you can get it from escrow. We have tools and zip forms that can help create it for you as well. If you have questions, just ask me about it later. But you can have escrow prepare a net sheet that shows what, if they sold it today at whatever price that is, what their proceeds is today, versus if they sold it by renting it out and it changes the usage of that property from owner occupied to an investment property, which means that HARPTA or FERPTA will apply. Those are withholding taxes. HARPTA is extremely expensive. Tony, what is HARPTA? Is it 8.25 right now? I think it's 8.25.
8.25.
And I think it's 8.25 of the sale, not the proceeds of the sale amount. So it's really, really high. Once they see that, they're usually like, okay, no, we're not renting it out. And again, you're not trying to scare someone or anything like that. But if you are advising and you're explaining risk, that's something that's super, super important to understand. And those who are newly licensed here and are currently licensed or came from another state practicing real estate, that HARPTA is not, it's something that you're probably not familiar with. It's specific to Hawaii. So it's something for you to know. And you should have that in your information.
So also, if somebody that's coming here or they decided they may want to rent or sell, rent the place out or sell, check on, have them check on what the property taxes will increase to. If they're in a pretty expensive home, the tax would go up substantially.
Yeah. Commonly used special terms. So the special terms section, for those of you who remember the contract previous, is it shrunk a ton, which is good. And the reason why it shrunk a ton is the authors of the purchase contract and attorneys said real estate agents oftentimes commit legal malpractice and are thinking they're attorneys and writing all these different clauses, and they shouldn't be. So they made it shorter on purpose. But some of the things that are absolutely acceptable to put in there is, your TIR selection, as I mentioned before. If you're requesting a building permit package, if you're requesting or you're inserting an escalation clause, an appraisal clause, if you're reimbursing for association documents or what have you, all these things we've written for you. They're in the global clause section in zip form. So don't get creative. Just use that. It's already been approved. We've reviewed it. We've looked at it. It works. And if there's a clause that you want to insert that you don't know how to write, just reach out to us, because we'll walk you through it or explain it or tell you why you should or shouldn't or whatever the case might be. This one I still see this. I literally still see this come up. The big signature on the bottom of page 14. So we're looking at page 14 on the slides right now. You see that box on the very bottom, reviewed by, and then in bold it says name of seller's principal broker, broker in charge. That's for rejections. And we didn't make that up. That's not just where Tony and I think that's the standard for KW. That is part of HAR 16-99-3J. So on page 14 of the purchase contract, on page 2 of the counter offer, that box is there. That box is for rejections. So just so you know, if you're on the whatever side you're on, if you're countering, you don't need, that's not a rejection. You're still going back and forth. You're countering, you're kind of volleying that offer. It's still alive. A rejection is, in its current form, I'm no longer doing business with you. We're not going to accept any other offers or negotiations or counters. Done. That's a rejection. So that's when we would sign that. If you have accepted an offer, we don't need to sign the bottom of that, but we should absolutely review it. So if you wrote an offer on the buy side, obviously Tony and I or Lisa or one of the BICs would have reviewed and signed page 1 of the purchase contract. You've submitted it to the other side. The other side has drafted a counter and sent it back. And their BIC or broker would have signed page 1 of the counter offer. We do not need to sign page 2 of the counter offer. We absolutely want to review it with you, though. Want to make sure that that is representing our client the right way, and there's nothing that is malicious that's in there or detrimental to the client in there. But we don't need to sign it. That's not a thing. So please have us review it. We do not need to sign it. I get things sent to me all the time to sign that box, and it's not a thing.
And Chad, the BIC only needs to sign the notice of rejection only if the seller's not signing.
Mhm.
If the seller signs a notice of rejection, the BIC doesn't need to sign it at all, or the PP.
Yeah, so that answers Napoleon's question too. That's a great question. So the seller is absolutely welcome to sign that rejection as well. So you'll notice in section T, it has boxes in there for acceptance, counter, or rejection. Please use that. Sometimes people will send me stuff and nothing is checked when in fact there is other documents. It's confusing to the BIC because we review so many contracts. We want to make sure that we know what we're going to review for you. If you ever wanted to know HER 16993, that's the law that basically states that that's for rejections. And this is not a new law. It's always been in place, but those agents that have been practicing, I would say probably 15, 20 years or more, Tony, right? It was commonplace. It wasn't even an insult. It was a commonplace that if you sent an offer over and it was rejected, the seller or the agent on the other side would write on the face on page 1 of it, rejected, and send it back. And it wasn't an insult. It wasn't like, anything bad. It was just, that's how you would inform the other side that it was rejected. Then for whatever reason, so that this rule has always been in place, and it's in place in multiple markets in multiple states, but for whatever reason, everyone got away from it. And I think what happened was a lot of agents were like, hey, the market blew up, and it's a seller's market, and did my offer even get presented? Did it even get reviewed by the seller? And they, on purpose, when they created this new iteration in May of 2019, this purchase contract, they added that box back in there. And that box that they added back in there is just to support that law that's already been in place. So it's not new. And some agents don't understand how that's used, but that's the law to reference. It is imperative anyone working with you have an active real estate license if they're conducting real estate activities. So this is for assistants. This is for transaction managers. Make sure that now you can do administrative function, you can do data entry, you can do a lot of different things without a real estate license. Ensure though that they are not practicing or doing real estate activities, because it comes down to your license as well as ours, as well as the firm. So make sure that if you have a team or you work with a group of people, that you're doing the right thing on how you're practicing. Otherwise, you're aiding and abetting, which carries with it fines and all kinds of other issues. Can an unlicensed assistant host an open house for a licensed agent? Tricky, right? The answer is they can be there. They can help, again, from a welcome to the open house kind of thing. Here's a flyer. Any questions that is asked of them related to the market or anything else has to then be forwarded to the licensed individual. I mean, they can't even say, hey, how's the market? They can't even answer that kind of question. Can an unlicensed assistant answer an incoming call for you? Yeah, sure. Yeah, that's like a receptionist function. But again, same thing as the moment that someone goes, hey, can you look up property that's located at whatever the address is? Let me have you speak to a licensed agent. Can an unlicensed assistant write a purchase contract for you? This is a tricky one as well. So data entry, yes, but they cannot, literally they cannot think for themselves. They cannot make a decision in any capacity whatsoever to drive the direction of that purchase contract. Stay in your lane. If you're asked to provide professional service in real estate for an area that you are not proficient, do not agree to represent the client or mislead the client in an area outside of one that you're licensed in. And we see this happen all the time. If you're not licensed in doing mortgages, don't give mortgage advice. If you're not a CPA, don't give tax advice. If you're not a lawyer, don't give legal advice. Just stay in your lane. We have so many vendors and partners and professionals at our fingertips. Defer to one of them. That's absolutely the best way to go. And some of it too, Tony and I don't know, a year or so ago, we're dealing with an agent or two that would oftentimes try to do the right thing by providing service to clients, but would step outside of the lane for like staging or home decorating or kind of almost architectural home design kind of thing. And that's a problem. Let's stay in your lane, which you're licensed to sell real estate. Because when you open up that can of worms, not only can you be sued for a variety of reasons, but it's almost, it's very unlikely that you probably had them sign an ABA, affiliated business arrangement disclosure as well, that you have this other thing going on. So it's tricky. It's unnecessary. Just stay in the lane that you're licensed for. As I mentioned before, write it down. Physicians got to write things down. Attorneys have to write things down. So do we. It's actually a legal thing. So more importantly, the greatest advice I think that Chemo Stone constantly pounds in our head is to write everything down. So if a client gives you instruction, and that instruction could be, I want to look for this type of property, or yes, I'm good with a home inspection. Let's move on past that. Or I want you to cancel, or whatever the instruction is. You might be having a conversation with them in person or on the phone. Follow up with an email. Per our conversation today, I wanted to confirm blank, whatever blank is. Document everything, because if you had to go to court, a judge and a jury and attorneys are going to grill you and say, what proof do you have that you've been given this instruction by your client? And if you just say, well, he told me on this day, and it was around this time that we had a phone call, and nothing is in writing, I promise you that's not going to be good for you. Tony, you want to say something?
Yeah, I want to say, like, when you're communicating in writing, especially situations like this, it's really important that you do it via email. That's the one thing that I've hammered on everybody for a long period of time. It's got to be an email because it's dated, it's timed, it's easy to print out, it's easy to forward. Text messaging is okay for like, hey, I'm running late for an appointment. But when you're talking about things in the contract and you're asking a seller or buyer to make a decision, it's got to be, or you're recapping a conversation, it's got to be an email, not text message.
And as a rule of thumb too, I understand that some clients may be the ones that initiate because they prefer text message. I get it. So if they're telling you, hey, and they're giving you instruction via text message, that's fine. Obviously keep the text message, but respond back via email and just say, just to confirm your text message dated such and such, you've instructed me to blank. So just so that it's easier to find. And by the way, a shameless plug for our own CRM system, Command, is if you have that tied into your email, it automatically updates that client's database, that record, with that email correspondence, and you don't even have to save it or anything. It automatically puts it in that client's file.
Yeah, Chad, also, if you've got a client that says, I only want to communicate via text message, ask them, or consider using WhatsApp, because WhatsApp, everything is documented by date and time, and you can actually print it out. You can save it, you can archive it. Text messages, you need to have on your phone forever, right? But as if you have a situation that comes, it surfaces some issue 2 years later, do you have all those text messages? Are they printed in your file? Probably not. But WhatsApp, you can archive all those conversations.
All I can tell you is Tony Pace's street cred just went up like 10 points. His stock is rising. If you start talking about Snapchat, I'm gonna lose it. No templates. So don't use your own template. We've created a guideline for you. If you just select buyer for conventional loan or buyer for VA loan, we've filled it out to the firm's minimum standards. Use that. That would be a far better thing to do. And by the way, the other thing too with that last paragraph is, here's the reason why you don't want to use a template that's already completed. We didn't do templates. We have some of the minimum standards that are in there. But the reason is, if ever you get audited, if ever you go to court and they're pulling your files and the last 15 clients that are unrelated to each other all have the same language, same days, same everything written in, and it doesn't show that you have your client's best interest in mind. It just shows that you're literally a robot putting in these dates and times that you probably don't know what the outcome is or what it even means. That's why it's really important to understand the contract and ensure that you get an idea of what their goals and priorities are and structure the contract to fit that. If you're on the list side, on the buy side too, to some extent, but if you're on the list side, don't copy MLS listings. It's easy to do, I realize, but It's garbage in, garbage out. So how do we know that the listing agent who had that listing didn't have wrong information? Now you just carried forward that wrong data. Just do the research. It's super, super easy to find data. Plus, if it's an old listing, it could be outdated as well. Do a buyer consultation. I have a class. I've done this buyer consultation class before. I'll do it as many times as you guys need. But the buyer consultation is such an important piece to building a bond and a relationship with the client. And when you do a good buyer consultation, they're never going to shop you. They're never going to leave you because you've shown them your value in understanding the intricacies of the market and understanding you become an area expert. And when you do a good buyer consultation, you set the expectation the right way. You can manage that client a lot better. And it's easy to do a reconsult if things go kind of start to go sideways. Whereas if you skip that buyer consultation and you go, man, I'm dealing with a client that's just a pain in the butt, it's really difficult to have a buyer consultation 3 weeks into that relationship because now they feel like they're being called into the principal's office. So it doesn't have that same impact at all. Do yourself a favor, do it up front. And you know what I've also discovered in my career too is I've done buyer consultations and realized I don't want to work with that buyer. That buyer is not the right fit for me. They're either a liability, they're a headache. I'd rather refer it out to someone else, or whatever the case might be, or their true motivation shows up where they're either not qualified or they're not really motivated or whatever it is. So just make sure that you do that buyer consult. An amendment versus an addendum, which one to use? The legal definition of each one is an addendum can and should be used prior to a contract being fully executed, whereas an amendment is a change after the fact, after it's been executed. That's why you would amend the purchase price, or you would amend the closing date, just for instance. Countering, for sake of clarity, when you're countering, you can update the date of expiration from the received offer. That's not a legal thing or a must, but we always want to try to remove any confusion or conflict. When there's confusion in a contract and someone screwed something up. So just make it ultra clear. If you're countering, you can kind of revise that expiration date if it's already since expired. Subject to contingencies, knowing your client's goals and priorities are paramount to how you structure the contract, be it on the buy side or list side or both. If your client is purchasing a property but needs the proceeds from a sale in order to buy, ensure that you have protected them with the proper contingencies, home sale contingency addendum, subject to replacement property, that kind of language and so forth, 1031 exchange or whatever that might be. Closing the windows, make sure that you understand what all the contingencies are. On the buy side, your goal is to try to have as many outs, as many windows that protect your client as possible. But when you're on the list side and you receive a contract like that, which is also why you want another set of eyes from your BIC to help you, is you want to try to close all those windows or at least minimize that. If a good buyer's agent had written a contract, it probably almost entirely favors the buyer. So if you just accept it, are you really protecting your client's best interest? Probably not. So there's always going to be a counter, more than likely. And then use a TC or a TM. We have one in house. You can use an outside one if they're so qualified. But the main thing is use one, because they say that it takes approximately 20 hours on each escrow for transaction management. That is time not well spent. Your goal as a real estate agent and as a professional in your career is to be $1,000 an hour agent. That does not serve you best when you want to be $1,000 an hour agent, but doing a $5 job. Not to say that TMs and TCs are not valued, but that's what they do for a living. They can do it at a high efficiency. That is not your strength. Let someone else do that. With that said, does anyone have any questions, comments, anything? Oh, Nepali, if documents need to be delivered as soon as executed, how do you have the buyer sign? Wait, Nepali, can you come off of mute and ask?
Yeah, so my question is, if, the requirement is that when documents are signed, they need to be delivered immediately. So how can you have your buyers sign the J1 release but it's not due for 10 days, and then hold it and not deliver it for 10 days to the seller.
You know, I'm going to give my opinion, and Tony can chime in. This is on the buy side. I'm going to make this up just for instance. Let's say I have a 10-day J1, and I do the home inspection on the second day. And on the second day, there's nothing wrong with the property. Certainly nothing that scares away the buyer. We're good to go. What I always do is I don't deliver that satisfaction of J1 until it's due, until the 10th day. Because there's been times where someone either gets cold feet or something else happens or whatever the case is. I don't want to shut a window prematurely. So I don't deliver that until the final day that it's due.
No, I understand the timing of the delivery, but I don't understand how you can have it signed today and then hold it and not deliver it immediately and wait 10 days before you deliver it.
You're just talking about the date part of it, the action of signing and the actual date of the document versus the date that it's delivered?
The date that it's signed and the date that it's delivered.
Tony, do you have any input on that? Does that make a difference?
I would just say get it signed closer to the J1 satisfaction as opposed to getting it signed up front and dated on the date that they actually sign it, especially if you're using DocuSign. That way there's no confusion on anybody's part as to when it was signed and when it was delivered. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, okay. I was just trying to address what Chad was explaining, that it sounded like you could hold it.
I don't think that there's any rule that you can't, but I think just for clarity's sake, if you signed it closer to that date, you avoid any kind of potential confusion.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions, feedback from anyone? I know I'm going to get emails and text messages in a minute. I guarantee it. Well, if there isn't any, thank you guys for taking time out of your very busy days to jump in. I'm here for every one of you. So if you have questions, let me know. If you need one-on-one or anything like that, I'm happy to help. Tony said that he would take any call from any individual day and night, right, Tony? I think Tony's shift is he wants to be called from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. is a shift that he's open to running for you guys and on the hotline, on the big hotline. For me, I'm only available for 1 hour a day. Every time outside of that, please call Tony. Tony, can I give you a personal number?
It looked like Stephanie had a question.
Oh, sure.
You know what? It was a little off topic, so I can just write an email. So that's fine.
Stephanie, you can text me after this is done too. Guys, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Take care. Look forward to the next one. Bye, guys.